Picture the pull. That specific itch. The one that says light it right now before you've even decided to. You know the one. Maybe it's yours. Maybe it's someone you loves and you've watched it happen to them 100 times and never understood why the pull was so much stronger than the reason to stop. Scientists can point to actual stretches of your DNA that make that pull stronger. Not a metaphor. Real gene regions doing real biochemical work every single time you feel that itch. And here's the part that should stop you. Some of that DNA didn't come from Homo sapiens at all. It came from Neanderthals. Which is a problem. And yes, you heard that correctly. A problem. Because Neanderthals went extinct around 40,000 years ago, and nicotine comes from tobacco, a plant that only ever grew in the Americas. Nobody on the Neanderthal side of the planet so much as touched a tobacco leaf until Columbus's cruise carried it back across the Atlantic in the 1490s. That's roughly 39,500 years after the last Neanderthal died. So how does a species that never once encountered the plant end up wiring the part of your brain that craves what's inside it? This is the story of the other humans, and the receptors they left running in you, 500 years before anyone on this side of the ocean had any reason to use them. Start with what actually happened, because it's simpler than it sounds. Somewhere around 50,000 to 60,000 years ago, small groups of Homo sapiens moving out of Africa met Neanderthal communities already living across Europe and Asia. They didn't just meet, they had children together. Those children survived, had children of their own and so on for 2,000 generations, roughly 200 times as many generations as have passed since the United States was founded, down to you. We don't know what those first meetings looked like. Nobody does. Maybe it was a chance encounter at a river crossing. Maybe it was slower than that. Two populations sharing the same hunting grounds for years before anything more happened. What we know is only the outcome. And we only know it because Svante Pääbo's team at the Max Planck Institute learned, in 2010, how to read it. By sequencing DNA out of a 40,000-year-old bone fragment and comparing it to yours. If you're of non-African descent, somewhere between 1% and 4% of your genome is Neanderthal. That doesn't sound like much. For comparison, that's roughly the same share of your body weight as one hand, maybe up to a forearm. But DNA doesn't need a large share to matter. A single % in the right spot can still be running a live system. One of the places it landed was near a gene called ChRNA5. No need to memorize that name. What matters is what it builds. A piece of a nicotinic acetylcholine receptor, a docking station in your brain and nervous system that responds to acetylcholine. A chemical messenger your own body makes and uses constantly for attention, for stress response, for keeping you alert when something matters. This receptor existed in Neanderthals for the same reason it exists in you. It was never built around nicotine. Nicotine just happens to fit the dock almost perfectly, close enough that it can walk in and use a system that was built for something else entirely. Rude, honestly, if you think about it. Think of it like a key that was never cut for this particular lock, sliding in anyway and turning. The receptor sitting in your skull right now didn't get smarter or worse at its job over those hundreds of thousands of years. It just got tricked by a molecule that showed up 500 years after the receptor's original purpose was already old news. Researchers behind a 2022 genetic study found that people carrying this Neanderthal-derived version of ChRNA5 smoke measurably more cigarettes per day than people who don't. Not whether they smoke, how much once they start. Absolutely wild when you sit with it. In 2022, a research team led out of the University of Tartu, working with colleagues at Charité Berlin and Amsterdam UMC, published a study in translational psychiatry that did something no one had done at this scale before. They screened the UK Biobank, 361,194 people, for every trace of Neanderthal DNA they could find, and checked it against everything from sleep patterns to pain sensitivity to substance use. More than 100 traits and disorders all told in that one sweep: sleep, pain, mood, drinking memory, and dozens more. Smoking was just one line in a very long list. It happened to be the line that leads back to you. 361,000 people. For comparison, that's enough people to fill more than 5 sold-out Super Bowls, one after another. One data set, one sweep. What came back strongest, again and again, was smoking. Tied with sleep and alcohol use as the traits Neanderthal DNA shaped the most. That same 2022 study also turned up something else. ChRNA5 wasn't the only signal. A completely separate stretch of Neanderthal DNA on chromosome 9 turned up as an even sharper predictor. Not of how much someone smokes, but of whether they smoke at all. And this is the part that actually matters. The researchers didn't stop at one population and call it done. No small task. running that same check 4 more times, in 4 more places. They checked it in the Netherlands, in Finland, in Iceland, in Estonia, 4 separate cohorts, 4 different countries, and each time, the same Neanderthal-derived stretch of chromosome 9 came back linked to smoking risk. A directionally similar signal turned up again in Biobank Japan, in people with a completely different ancestral background. That's the genetic equivalent of checking the same result against 4 different populations, across 4 different countries, and getting the same answer every single time. Genuinely eerie, honestly. 2 separate pieces of your genome, on 2 separate chromosomes, both nudging you toward the same unlit cigarette. If you haven't subscribed yet, this is the part where I ask. Please, like and subscribe. It helps this channel more than you'd think. Did you hit it? Good. Back to the story. Here's where the honest version of this story gets harder than the tidy one. It would be easy and wrong to say Neanderthals were wired to crave nicotine, full stop. They weren't. They never could have been. Nicotine wasn't a variable evolution was solving for on their side of the planet. Whatever these 2 variants were doing for a Neanderthal 60,000 years ago, that's roughly 12 times longer than anyone on Earth had invented writing. Neither one was preparing them for a cigarette. So what were they doing? Nobody knows for certain, and the researchers behind the study don't pretend otherwise. Science hates that answer. So a little, do we. chRNA5's receptor does a lot of jobs that have nothing to do with smoking. Regulating stress reactivity, sharpening attention in dangerous moments, modulating how the body processes pain. A slightly more sensitive version of that receptor system might have helped a Neanderthal stay alert on a cold hunt, or ride out a stressful winter, or tolerate an injury long enough to make it home. The chromosome 9 variant is even harder to explain. Researchers haven't identified what it actually does in the body yet, only that it's there, and that it's linked to smoking risk today. 2 open questions, not one. This is one of the honest gaps in the science. The traits got inherited forward, the original reasons they existed did not. And there's a second honest gap sitting underneath the first one. A study like this can show that people carrying a particular Neanderthal variant are more likely to smoke. It cannot show that the variant makes them smoke, not directly and not alone. Genetics rarely hands you that kind of clean, single-cause certainty. What it hands you instead is a correlation robust enough to survive 4 independent replications in 4 different countries without ever fully explaining the mechanism underneath it. That's a strange kind of confidence, sure of the pattern, unsure of the machinery. Environment still does most of the work here. Whether you ever pick up a cigarette in the first place depends far more on the people around you than on any single stretch of your DNA. The variant tilts the odds. It doesn't write the outcome. Wonderfully unsatisfying if you were hoping for a clean answer. What we can say is this. Both variants are real. They're measurably more common in people carrying Neanderthal ancestry. And 500 years ago, humanity accidentally handed them the one molecule on Earth that fits at least one of them almost perfectly. That's not folklore. That's 4 independent datasets agreeing on the chromosome 9 signal alone. And it's genuinely frustratingly unresolved, which, if you've been on this channel with us, you already know it's usually where the truest part of the story lives. If you've ever fought that pull, or watched someone you love fight it and lose more times than they won, you were probably taught to think of it as a personal failure, a weakness, a character flaw you should have been strong enough to outwill. Here's what the evidence actually says. Some of that pull runs on 2 separate pieces of 400,000-year-old inheritance. One that may have shaped whether you'd ever pick up a cigarette at all. One that shapes how hard it is to put back down. Both older than every spoken language, older than every tool tradition anyone has ever named. Both were built for a different world, meeting a chemical neither one was ever designed to meet. That's not a small thing to carry. You didn't choose either piece of it. Neither did anyone you love who's ever struggled with this. None of that changes what nicotine does to a body today. And it isn't a reason to stop trying to quit or to stop supporting someone who is. But it is a reason to stop calling it a defect. It was never a defect. It's a Neanderthal. They didn't disappear. You absorbed them, twice over, in 2 separate places in your genome, both of them meeting the same unlikely chemical for the first time, 500 years and 40,000 years apart. Thanks for watching. Until next time, on The Other Humans.